Thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. President Donald Trump strayed from script at a news conference Tuesday and now faces a firestorm of bipartisan criticism for his remarks about what happened in Charlottesville, Virginia. Perhaps the chief complaint, the president saying there were, quote, very fine people on both sides. Heather Sells has more.
The president said there's blame on both sides for what happened in Charlottesville. He spoke about what he called the alt-left, charging with clubs at the alt-right.
What about the alt-left that came charging at the, as you say, the alt-right? Do they have any semblance of guilt?
There is evidence of violence on the alt-left side, like these photos. The president also defended himself from critics who say he should not have waited 2 days to condemn specific groups in Charlottesville.
I wanted to make sure, unlike most politicians, that what I said was correct, not make a quick statement.
The president spoke of, quote, very fine people on both sides and said that both sides were to blame. It's that perspective that has so many on both the left and right outraged. Even former presidential candidates Jeb Bush and Mitt Romney denounced the comments. Perhaps the only ones who seemed truly pleased, the protesters. David Duke, the former leader of the KKK, thanked Trump on Twitter for his honesty and courage. As more and more cities move to remove Confederate statues, the president wondered aloud what's next.
Well, no, George Washington was a slave owner. Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down, are we going to take down statues to George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson?
Overnight, city crews in Baltimore began removing Confederate monuments, and in Birmingham, Alabama, crews covered a Confederate statue while the city debates legal options to remove it. In the nation's capital, vandals defaced the Lincoln Memorial, using red graffiti and explicit language. Amidst all the unrest, the father of Charlottesville victim Heather Heyer is setting an example. He says he forgives the man who killed his daughter.
People need to stop hating, and they need to forgive each other, and I include myself in that, in forgiving the guy that did this. Okay, he don't know no better. I just think of what the Lord said on the cross. Lord, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing.
Many Christian leaders this week have called for a full condemnation of white supremacists, with no exceptions. They're also calling for the church to lead the way in a country that needs reconciliation and healing, perhaps more than ever. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Alabama held a special primary election Tuesday to fill the Senate seat vacated by now Attorney General Jeff Sessions. The state's Attorney General Luther Strange and former Alabama Chief Justice Roy Moore will now advance to a runoff in September. Political observers see the Republican race as most important. They predict whoever wins the GOP primary will go on to beat Democrat Doug Jones in the general election. Religious freedom is still threatened in many places around the world. The State Department's annual report card gave bad marks to a number of countries, including China and U.S. ally Saudi Arabia. CBN's national security correspondent Eric Rosales breaks down the list, which included terrorist organizations.
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson held nothing back when he named the group ISIS as one of the biggest threats to religious freedom across the globe. He says the group is responsible for genocide against Shiite Muslims, Yazidis, and Christians.
Their terrorist members have and continue to target multiple religions and ethnic groups for rape, kidnapping, enslavement, and even death.
Tillerson said the State Department under President Donald Trump will continue to help those seeking to live their lives according to their faith.
No one should have to live in fear, worship in secret, or face discrimination because of his or her beliefs. As President Trump has said, we look forward to a day when, quote, people of all faiths, Christians and Muslims and Jewish and Hindu, can follow their hearts and worship according to their conscience.
The report released Tuesday looks at the state of religious freedom in 199 foreign countries and describes what the U.S. is doing to support those rights. There are several countries of particular concern, including China, Iran, North Korea, and Saudi Arabia. China is cited for continuing to physically abuse, detain, arrest, torture, and imprison Christians and other religious minorities. Tillerson pointed to Iran for its persecution of Christians and others, plus laws that deny their citizens freedom of religion.
20 individuals were executed in 2016 on charges that included, quote, waging war against God. Members of the Baha'i community are in prison today simply for abiding by their beliefs.
In Saudi Arabia, the government does not recognize the rights of non-Muslims to practice their religion in public. And as for North Korea, which the Christian nonprofit watchdog group Open Doors International calls the most oppressive place in the world for Christians, Tillerson said the government continues to punish those engaging in religious practices last year, with executions, torture, and other abuse. The State Department began releasing this annual report since the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998 was amended by President Clinton to help better understand and protect religious freedom as a foreign policy. Eric Rosales, CBN News, Washington.
Coming up, an investigative reporter blows the lid off the news media itself. Sharyl Attkisson reveals how information has been corrupted by special interests. We've got the story coming up next. Most Americans know you can't always trust the stories you hear in the news, probably especially the political ones. Award-winning reporter Sharyl Attkisson explains some of the reasons why in her new book, The Smear. She sat down with our own CBN News reporter Jenna Browder to explain what the smear machine is and how it operates.
Behind many political stories lurks a hidden agenda. This disturbing movement is exposed by Sharyl Attkisson in her latest book. And as a journalist with more than 30 years' experience, she has the stories to back it up. The Smear. Why the title?
I think it encapsulates this trend that I talk about that's happening in Washington, D.C., but has an impact really all over the world.
In our one-on-one, the hard-hitting investigative journalist told me the ultimate goal is control.
There's an industry that is paid to go after and target journalists, whistleblowers, political figures, whatever it may be, and inundate our consciousness and the images we see to try to ruin, destroy, or smear the idea that they don't like or the person who's delivering it on behalf of paid corporate or political interests.
In her latest book, she pulls back the curtain on how sophisticated operatives work to establish storylines, manipulate journalists, and ultimately shape what you think.
I quote one of the smear artists himself. It kind of gave me chills when he said, everything you see is put there for a reason. He said it's like a movie, it's like a scene in a movie, that the images that you come across, whether it's what a comedian jokes about on a national program, whether it's social media, whether it's on the news, he says it's put there for a reason, often by somebody who paid a lot of money to put it there.
She points to this past election as a primary example of the smear machine operating at full speed.
There was the idea that maybe in the past conservatives have had the edge, but for 2016 going into that race, all seemed to agree Democrats had control of the messaging, particularly when it came to using the news media. To the extent conservatives try to control the news message, yes, they would like to just as much, but they don't have as much of a receptive ear in the news media, so they're not able to do it as effectively. And what you see in the book, I've used their own statistics from emails returned through FOIA requests or sometimes exposed by WikiLeaks. These groups say how they were able to influence the narrative. They name names. They talk about the news publications and networks that published the stories they wanted them to publish. I've even published emails between journalists and these interests that they're supposed to cover, showing what I call transactional journalism, which I think is ethically inappropriate, where they're making deals with the newsmakers to cover things a certain way.
So help me God.
Although Democrats may have been more effective, Republicans ultimately won. Attkisson says this could be because voters are becoming more media savvy.
Are people getting wise to these techniques? Are they seeing through some of the narratives? Because I think it's fair to say 90% of the news narrative was in one direction, and yet Donald Trump still managed to overcome what this huge machine had built against him, Democrats, Republicans, and the media, to become president.
Today, one reoccurring narrative is Russia. President Trump says that this Russian probe is a political witch hunt. You have James Comey, who admitted to leaking documents to spur on this special counsel. And then the special counsel is Robert Mueller, who's one of his friends. And then Robert Mueller goes and hires friends of the Clintons. Is President Trump onto something? Is this a political witch hunt?
Yes, he is onto something. President Trump is correct when he says that this is a witch hunt in some respect, based on the evidence to date and based on President Obama's own intel experts, who not only didn't see any evidence of collusion between Donald Trump and the Russians by their own account, but also by the account of all public information, Democrats and Republicans alike, who haven't seen the connection, and yet you've seen it dominate the news narrative. I call it like the Brady Bunch, Marsha, Marsha, Marsha. You just hear Russia, Russia, Russia all the time. And there have been wildly incorrect reports from some formerly top, well-respected news outlets in the nation about all of this. And in some cases, they haven't even corrected or done mea culpas when what they've reported has been found to be false. It's not that the Russia question doesn't deserve some investigation, but the coverage for it is so wildly disproportionate to the evidence at large.
Whether it's Russia coverage or any other story, Attkisson says to step back and ask questions. And when it comes to so-called experts, are fact-checkers really trustworthy?
I quote some surveys and research that's been done on this that found, indeed, the fact-checkers that hold themselves out to be independent, where you may turn to say, I really want the truth about this or that so I can go to a fact-checker, turns out they're not so independent in many cases. Take Snopes, for example. We found instances where they're very good at fact-checking some things, but have been co-opted by special interests on some topics where they've put out incorrect, misleading, biased, or even false information.
A big one to watch out for, she says, is a source many of us know well.
You look at Wikipedia, some people say for the facts, even though they know volunteer editors are at play, but they don't know the extent to which corporate interests and big PR firms pretend to be volunteer editors and have developed strong editing privileges to control the pages of certain topics and people so that they smear some people or protect others from having negative things published so that they're furthering certain ideas of paid interest that you don't know about.
If there's one thing Attkisson wants you to learn from her book, it's this.
Nearly every image that's put before them, in the words of the people who operate in this universe, is put before them for a reason by an interest that is often not disclosed. And that should make you question when you see themes and memes coming up on social media and common ideas expressed over and over again. That should make you question who's behind it, who wants me to think this way.
And what is their agenda? She says asking questions doesn't necessarily mean a story is false, but it's important to make sure you're getting the whole story and approaching almost every story you read with a healthy dose of skepticism. For CBN News, I'm Jenna Browder.
Up next, see the mother of all buses and find out why 9 out of 10 women who come aboard decide to keep their babies. Iceland has nearly achieved a shocking goal. The country has eliminated almost 100% of children with Down syndrome. They have aborted almost all of them. CBS News reports it is due to widespread use of prenatal screening. Even though most people born with Down syndrome live long, healthy lives, most pregnant women in Iceland choose to abort these babies. Other countries are doing the very same thing. Denmark has aborted 98%, and the U.S. has aborted 67% of babies with genetic disorders. Penny Nance of the Concerned Women for America said Iceland sounds like they are proud of the fact that they've killed nearly all unborn babies that had an in utero diagnosis of Down syndrome. This is not a medical advancement. This is eugenics and barbarianism at its best. Planned Parenthood has unleashed a new business model with huge mega centers. The abortion company now performs almost a third of all abortions in the U.S., 70,000 and more than a decade ago. But as Heather Sells shows us, pro-lifers are fighting back with a simple technology, and it comes on wheels.
6 days a week, this big blue bus parks outside Planned Parenthood's huge abortion center in Houston. It's no doubt a major irritant, if not outright threat to the corporation's bottom line. That's because the bus offers free ultrasound images and pregnancy tests to any woman in need.
Life and death decisions are literally made on this bus. Thousands of women have stepped aboard it since it first opened, and the majority of them have decided to keep their unborn children.
I love to be able to tell people about the bus.
It is so important. It's so easy to say, honey, we have help right here, right behind you in the bus.
For the volunteer prayer warriors and sidewalk counselors, the bus functions as the perfect resource. A sanctuary easily accessible to women coming and going right before their abortion.
Because there's a 24-hour waiting period, they will go into the facility for their ultrasound, then they come out afterwards, and then they go back in again for the abortion. And so the hope is that they will be able to pass a prayer warrior who will be able to hand them one of these cards at any given time.
That happened to Rochelle Scott, who thought she had to abort because she couldn't afford a second child. Her son Alan lives and thrives today thanks to the bus.
As soon as I saw him on the ultrasound and they let me hear the heart, I started crying. Like that was it.
What happens here is simple yet stunning. 9 out of 10 women who come aboard keep their baby. Even those who only moments earlier prepared to end their child's life just across the street.
Initially, they're very kind of nervous, confused, shocked. You can tell it on their face. They really don't want to, don't want to see it because they know that might change their mind.
They usually start crying as we begin and cover their eyes. And as we're continuing with the ultrasound, they start peeking out between their fingers. And we call it a baby and we call them mom. And look, your baby's sucking his thumb. Oh, he has the hiccups. And the next thing we know, they're smiling and crying at the same time.
Park says the power of this moment, helping a pregnant woman understand her new identity and the reality of her child, cannot be underestimated. She and all who operate the ultrasound machine will spend as much time as needed with the new moms.
She stays on that table until she decides she wants the baby.
More than 7,000 women have visited the bus since it opened 4 years ago. Nationwide, more than 1,000 crisis pregnancy centers, including a few mobile units, also offer free ultrasounds. One of the largest organizations, CareNet, estimates it has helped to save almost 400,000 babies. At the same time, Planned Parenthood is opening more mega centers, virtual abortion mills of 10,000 square feet or more. Unfortunately, their business model appears to have paid off, resulting in 70,000 more abortions a year compared to 10 years ago.
It really weighs heavy on us when we see a mom who comes and she sees her baby and we show her the models and, show her the heartbeat, play it for her back, and she still goes over there.
For Rochelle Scott, little Alan is a sweet daily reminder of her decision. She says both her boys have given her more determination to live her life well and have inspired her to write a poem about her experience.
So now I'm laid out on a hospital bed forgetting my faith, thinking that in killing, there's peace. Please. And then God kicks in. And then, a couple of months later, I have you, and you're crying, and I'm singing, hush, little baby, don't you cry. The sound of your voice, Alan, is priceless.
Reporting in Houston, Heather Sells, CBN News.
Hush, little baby, don't you cry. Great story. And stay with us. There's much more of CBN NewsWatch straight ahead. Play ball. A church is mixing prayer with America's favorite pastime. It's called Nats Mass, and it's happening in our nation's capital. Our Ben Kennedy has the story.
One church in the nation's capital saw an opportunity to score when thinking about fans if they go to church before a baseball game. Trading in dress clothes for baseball gear? You heard it. This is not your typical Sunday service.
They have it every... We're going to a baseball game.
You're going to a baseball game? But before 2-year-old Claire Dunlap can go to the game...
Are you going to go to church first?
Yeah.
She attends service at St. Vincent de Paul, just down the road from the Nationals ballpark. In 2014, church leaders came up with the idea as they watched fans walk by the chapel on Sundays. That idea led to Nats Mass, which starts about an hour and a half before game time.
That is the joy of it, of the Nats Mass. It's really bringing people together to worship together as one family. knowing that it is, first of all, God. I have actually witnessed some who just said to me, you know, Father, was my first time to come to Mass, but because I saw that sign, I came. And that was so touching for me as a priest.
Of course, Nats Mass even has its own hashtag, aiming to get people talking about the service across social media.
It's nice too because this is an outreach as well, because we can talk about how we went to Nats Mass before we went to the ball game.
And this Nats service is open to both sides.
And the other team.
So you don't turn away the opponents?
No. We don't. They are all welcome. They are all welcome. Why? Because it's a worship. It's the Mass. It's to give thanks to the Lord.
We're rooting for finding God and fellowship and friendship and hopefully a great game where everybody can have a good time.
Patrick Abbott attended the first Nats Mass, which drew only 5 people. 3 years later, that number has grown into more than 100. A grand slam for St. Vincent de Paul, sharing God's message one pitch at a time.
To help get the word out on Nats Mass, church leaders put up 2 big banners along the bell tower here behind me, hoping fans will slide into service before that first pitch. For CBN News, I'm Ben Kennedy in Washington.
Thanks, Ben. Well, right now it's time for your Wednesday word, and the word on my heart today comes straight from the pages of Scripture. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. That is the 46th Psalm and the 10th verse. Sometimes in the middle of chaos, all you can do is be still and know that He is God. And in that stillness, He will be exalted. With that word, make this a wonderful Wednesday. That is going to wrap for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about always at cbnnews.com. We'd love to hear what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. You can also reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hope you'll join us again right here next time. Make this a wonderful Wednesday. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.